The last thing Amina saw was her stepmother's angry face. Then everything went dark. Amina was only 18, yet her life already felt like a cage with no door. Since her mother's death, her father, Pa Musa, had married another woman, Madam Zuba. To the villagers, Madam Zuba was gentle. She laughed in the market, sold palm wine and yams with a sweet smile, and greeted people warmly. But when the compound gates closed, her smile turned into sharp teeth. For Amina, every day was a battle. At dawn, before the cock crowed, Madam Zuba's voice pierced the air. "Amina, get up, lazy girl! Sweep the compound before the sun sees dirt." Sleepy-eyed and weary, Amina would drag her broom, her thin arms aching, while Zuba's children, Sade and Kola, snored peacefully inside. Her chores never ended. She fetched water from the stream until her neck bent under the weight of clay pots. She pounded yam until her palms blistered. She scrubbed clothes in the river until her fingers bled. Her skin carried scars from cane whips. Her feet were always cracked, and her stomach groaned with hunger. And what did she get in return? Cold pap with no sugar. Hardened leftovers that even chickens refused. Meanwhile, Madam Zuba served steaming stew, fresh fish, and sweet fruit to her own children, laughing as they chewed. Sometimes, Amina's hunger grew so sharp, she pressed her belly with both hands just to silence the pain. If she made the smallest mistake, spilling a drop of water, breaking a plate, or coughing while sweeping Zuba's voice thundered, "Useless child," she would shout, slapping Amina across the face or beating her with a stick. "Even the dust on your mother's grave is more useful than you." At night, when the house grew quiet, Amina lay on her raffia mat, staring at the dark ceiling. Tears soaked her cheeks, but she dared not make a sound. Her father must not know. He came home from the farm exhausted, his back bent, his hands hardened like bark. Amina loved him too much to add more weight to his shoulders, so she buried her pain in silence, carrying it like a heavy stone pressed into her heart. She prayed every night, "Mama, if your spirit can hear me, watch over me. I am so tired." And so, behind Madam Zuba's painted smile, Amina suffered, unseen, unheard, and unloved. But one moonlit night, everything changed. The wind howled, carrying with it a strange hum. Amina tossed on her mat, unable to sleep. Her chest felt heavy, as if something in the night was calling her. She rose and peered out the window. Her breath caught. 8 women draped in red wrappers were leaving the compound, walking in a line like shadows. At the very end was Madam Zuba, her stepmother. Curiosity gripped Amina tighter than fear. Quiet as a cat, she slipped outside and followed them, careful to stay hidden in the tall grass. Her bare feet sank into the cool earth as she trailed them along the narrow bush path that led to the village stream. When they reached the water's edge, the women stopped. The moon hung high, glowing like a silver drum. Its light spilled across the rippling water, painting everything ghostly white. The women spread out in a wide circle. The stream gurgled softly, but their voices soon drowned it out. They began to chant, swaying from side to side. Their shadows bent and twisted across the ground, their voices rising and falling in a rhythm that made Amina's skin crawl. One of them lifted a clay pot filled with dark liquid and poured it into the stream. The water hissed, bubbling as though alive. "It is time," one of them declared. The circle answered, "It is time." Another raised her hands. "A strong spirit must be taken." Madame Zuba's voice cut the night like a knife. "Yes, let our husbands be the ones. In 3 nights, their spirits will be ours, and our power will grow." Amina's heart slammed against her chest. "My father, Pamusa, they were planning to kill him." She staggered back, desperate to escape, but her foot slipped on a wet stone. She fell, splashing into the shallow water. The chants stopped instantly. 8 heads turned, eyes glowing like burning coal. "There," one hissed. "Over there. Catch her," Madame Zuba screamed. Amina scrambled up and ran. Branches tore at her arms as she fled into the trees. But before she could reach the safety of the path, a wave of black smoke rolled from the stream, swirling around her like a living thing. Her lungs burned, her legs buckled. The last thing she saw was Juba's furious face above her, the moon reflecting in her cruel eyes, and then a blinding flash of light. Darkness swallowed her whole. When Amina woke, the world was strange. The air felt sharper, cooler. The blades of grass around her loomed like a forest. Stones looked like boulders. Even the simple clay pot beside the kitchen appeared as large as a hut. She opened her mouth to cry out, but only a thin squeak slipped through. Her chest tightened. She looked down. Soft fur covered her body. Her hands were gone, replaced by trembling paws. Her nose twitched without her control. 2 long ears rose and fell with every fearful breath. Amina gasped, but the sound was nothing more than a frightened squeal. She had been turned into a rabbit. Her stepmother's shadow fell across her. Zuba bent down, her smile as sharp as a knife. "Now, let's see how you warn your father," she hissed. With a rough grip, she snatched Amina and shoved her into a small raffia cage. The lid snapped shut with a cruel finality. That night, Amina sat huddled in the corner of the cage. Her small body shook, her heart thumping so hard she thought it would break her ribs. She tried to pray, but the words came out as squeak. She scratched at the raffia bars until her claws ached, but it was useless. Outside, Zuba hummed to herself as though nothing was wrong. The house slept peacefully while Amina wept silently in her prison. At dawn, Pamusa woke up looking for Amina. He called for her, but no answer. Instead, Zuba came out of the hut. "Where's Amina?" Pamusa asked. "I don't know. She's probably inside sleeping." "You know how much Amina loves to sleep," Zuba replied. And when Pamusa left the house, Zuba went back inside. She placed the cage inside a large basket, covering it with cloth. On top, she heaped yams, pepper, and dried fish to make it look like an ordinary trader's load. With the basket balanced on her head, she set off for the market. The sun was already hot when she arrived. She placed the basket down, pulled out the cage, and set it by her table. "Healthy rabbit for sale," she called. "Very fat, very strong." Villagers came and went. Some bent down to poke at the cage, pulling Amina's ears, tapping her head. "How much?" one woman asked. 8 cowries, Zuba said quickly. "Too much," the woman scoffed and left. Hours dragged on. The market grew loud with haggling voices, the smell of roasted maize and fried plantain drifting through the air. Sweat poured down Zuba's face as she shouted again and again, "Healthy rabbit for sale!" Inside the cage, Amina's tiny heart raced. She pressed her paws to the bars. She wanted to scream, "Don't buy me! I am not a rabbit! I am a girl!" "Keep quiet, naughty girl," Mama Zuba said under her breath while pulling Amina's fur and smiling to her customers. But no one could understand Amina. All that came out was a desperate squeak. People only laughed at the strange rabbit that stared too long, its eyes too full of fear. At last, as the sun dipped lower, a weary fisherman approached. His clothes were patched, his shoulders bent from years on the river. He carried a small sack in one hand. He looked down at the rabbit and studied her for a long time. Amina froze, her whiskers twitching nervously. "How much for this one?" he asked in a quiet, gravelly voice. "For you." Zuba's eyes gleamed. 7 cowries. "And dough." The fisherman nodded and pulled the money from his sack. Zuba snatched it with greedy fingers, then shoved the cage toward him. For the first time that day, she smiled. Amina's tiny chest sank. Her paws trembled as the fisherman lifted the cage. The world swayed with each step he took away from the market. She pressed her face against the raffia, watching her stepmother fade into the crowd. "This is the end," she thought. "I will never see Papa again." The fisherman walked steadily, his feet crunching on the dusty road. The market noise faded. Only the rustle of trees and the far-off murmur of the river filled the silence. His house stood near the water, a small hut with a roof of palm leaves. He set the cage down in his yard with a grunt of relief. "Tomorrow," he muttered, stretching his tired arms. "You will make a good bitter leaf soup," he said, salivating. Then he turned and went inside, leaving Amina outside in the fading light. Her paws shook. Her eyes darted wildly. The cage rattled as she pushed against it, desperate for freedom, but nothing moved. She was trapped, helpless, and alone. Tears welled inside her, but rabbits have no tears to show. All she could do was squeak softly into the night, praying that somehow, someone would hear. Amina crouched low in the corner of the cage. Her small body trembled, her ears flicking at every sound. She pressed her paws against the raffia, desperate, but the bars held firm. In her mind, one thought circled endlessly: tomorrow I will die. Then the door creaked. A young girl stepped into the yard. Her hair was braided in loose strands, and she wore a wrapper tied clumsily around her waist. She couldn't have been more than 11. Her name was Mariam. She came barefoot across the sandy ground, humming softly to herself until her eyes fell on the cage. She stopped. "What a strange rabbit," she whispered, kneeling beside it. "Why do you stare like that?" Amina's chest heaved. She wanted to shout, "I am not a rabbit!" But all that escaped was a squeak. Mariam tilted her head. "You look sad," she said softly. "Almost like you're crying." Desperation surged in Amina. She tried again, forcing the words through her small mouth. This time, a faint whisper escaped. "Please." But Mariam still couldn't understand her. She stood up and walked away, leaving Amina behind. All night, Amina squeaked and scratched at the raffia cage. But to Mariam, It only sounded like the restless noise of an unhappy rabbit. She went back outside and knelt beside the cage and whispered, "Why do you look at me like that? What do you want?" Amina tried to speak. Words trembled on her tongue, but to Mariam's ears it was nothing but squeals. The girl shook her head. "Poor thing. You must be hungry," she said softly, sliding a few groundnut shells through the bars. Then she left, never imagining the rabbit's eyes were begging her for something far greater. Dawn broke with the crowing of the rooster. The fisherman, Mariam's father, rose with purpose. He sharpened his long knife against a flat stone, the grating sound cutting through the morning air. Sparks leapt. He muttered to himself, "Tonight we will eat well." Mariam's stomach twisted. She thought of the strange way the rabbit had stared at her the night before, as though it carried a secret. She crept to the cage, her small hands trembling. "Maybe I'm just foolish," she whispered. "But something about you isn't right." She lifted the latch for a moment. Silence. Then, like a flash, Amina burst from the cage, her small white body darting across the yard. "Papa!" Mariam cried. "The rabbit! It's running away!" The fisherman dropped his knife with a curse. Both father and daughter charged after the fleeing rabbit. Through the dusty path, over thorny bushes, Amina ran like the wind. The man's footsteps thundered behind her, Mariam's voice shouting, There she goes." But Amina was faster than fear. Her heart pounded as she darted through narrow paths, her ears flapping with each bound. She did not stop until she leapt through the open gate of a compound guarded by carved wooden figures. The fisherman stopped short, panting. Mariam clutched his arm, her eyes wide. "Papa, this is Baba Karim's compound." Amina bounded into the sandy yard of Baba Karim's compound and collapsed near the threshold, her tiny rabbit chest rising and falling. Moments later, Mariam and her father stumbled in after her, both panting from the chase. The old man stepped out slowly from his hut. His eyes were clouded white, pupils lost in mist. Everyone in the village knew Baba Karim had been blind for many years. His staff tapped the earth as he walked, steady and sure, though he could not see the world as others did. Yet, as his head tilted toward the rabbit at his feet, his expression softened, his lips curved into a faint smile. "My child," he said in a calm, deep voice, "what brings you to my house so early?" Mariam's breath caught. She glanced at her father, then back at the rabbit. "Papa, did you hear? He called it a child." The fisherman scowled, sweat dripping down his temples. "Baba, with all respect, you are mistaken. It is a rabbit we chased here, nothing more." But Baba Karim lifted his face toward the morning sun, his cloudy eyes glowing faintly. "Your eyes see fur and ears. Mine see a girl, weary and bound by a curse." Mariam clutched her father's hand, trembling. "Papa," he says, "it is a girl." The fisherman shook his head, bewildered. "Impossible." Then, to their astonishment, the rabbit lifted its head, and in a faint, broken whisper came the words, "Please, Baba, help me. I am Amina." Mariam gasped aloud, stumbling back. Her father staggered, as though struck by a heavy blow, but the blind elder only nodded slowly, tapping his staff once against the ground. "Yes," he murmured, his voice heavy with knowing. I see you, child. I see what others cannot. The yard fell silent. Only the rustle of the baobab leaves moved in the morning breeze. Mariam clutched her father's arm, staring wide-eyed at the rabbit that had just spoken. The fisherman's face was pale with disbelief, but Baba Karim, the blind elder, leaned on his staff, unshaken. His cloudy eyes seemed to pierce beyond the world of men. He stretched his hand toward Amina. "Come, child. Do not fear. The spirits have already brought you here." To Mariam and her father, the rabbit hopped forward, ears drooping, fur trembling. But to Baba Karim, a weary girl knelt before him, her wrapper torn, her face streaked with dust and tears. "Tell me," he said gently, "what has happened to you?" Amina's small voice quivered. "My stepmother. She is not what she seems. She cursed me after I discovered her secret. She and others, they plan to take my father's life and their husbands' lives in 3 nights, which is tomorrow." The fisherman staggered back, his knees weakening. "What? My friend Musa's child?" His voice cracked. "And I almost..." His words died in his throat. Mariam pressed closer to Baba Karim, trembling but listening with every breath. The elder nodded slowly. "I feel the unrest in the night winds. Now the truth stands before me." He raised his staff high. "Do not weep, child. The curse that binds you will not last here." He spread a woven mat on the ground and motioned for the rabbit to be placed upon it. Though hesitant, the fisherman carried Amina and placed her on the mat. The elder reached for a small calabash that hung by his doorway. Inside was water mixed with crushed herbs. He sprinkled it in a circle around her. Then, lifting his blind eyes to the sky, he began to chant. The air shifted, the wind stilled. The leaves of the baobab stopped swaying. Even the birds went silent, as if the earth itself listened. White smoke rose from the ground, curling like hands around Amina's small body. Her fur shimmered, her ears shrank, her paws stretched into fingers. Slowly, before Mariam's astonished eyes, the rabbit melted away. And there, kneeling on the mat, was Amina, weak, trembling, but fully human once more. Mariam cried out, covering her mouth in shock. Her father fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Oh, merciful heavens, it's true. She's no rabbit. She's a child." Amina looked at Baba Karim, tears rolling freely now. "Thank you. Thank you." The old man placed his hand on her head, his touch firm but kind. "You are free, my daughter, but your journey is not finished. You must run to your father now. Speak the truth before the 3rd night falls, or his life will be lost." Amina nodded, her eyes blazing with new strength. She turned to Mariam and whispered, "You saved me." The girl shook her head. "I only opened the cage. The spirits chose you." The fisherman bowed low to Baba Karim, his voice choked. "Forgive me. I nearly ended an innocent life." Baba Karim raised his staff. "Do not carry shame. The curse was meant to blind all but the willing heart. You did not see, but now you know." Amina rose, steadying herself. Her legs were weak, but her spirit burned with urgency. She bowed deeply. "I must go, Baba. My father must hear the truth before it's too late." The blind elder smiled faintly. "Then go, child. Let the wind carry your feet. And barefoot With dust rising behind her, Amina ran down the red path, toward home, toward the truth. And behind her were Mariam and her father, running to testify. Meanwhile, in Pa Musa's compound, he had woken early that same morning, calling out, "Amina, bring me water." But as usual, Madame Zuba met him with a smooth smile and an excuse. "She went to the stream, my husband. You know how that girl is. Always wandering." Pa Musa sighed heavily, unaware that his daughter had returned from the edge of death and that the truth was rushing back home to meet him. Amina ran barefoot down the dusty road, her wrapper torn, her hair wild, her heart pounding. Every step carried her closer to home. In the compound, Pa Musa sat on a low stool, his head bowed, his face heavy with worry because Amina was yet to be back from the stream. When he lifted his eyes and saw her racing toward him, dirty, trembling, he leapt to his feet. "Amina!" His voice cracked. He rushed to her, wrapping her in his arms. "My child, where have you been? I have been waiting for you. Where's your pot of water? And why do you look this way? What happened to you?" But Amina's face was grave. She pointed at the house with a trembling hand. "Papa, it was Zuba. She turned me into a rabbit. She's a witch. In 3 nights, she planned to give your spirit to the spirits, alongside their husbands." The neighbors who had gathered nearby gasped. Whispers rippled through the crowd like fire through dry grass. At that very moment, Mama Zuba stepped out of the house, balancing a pot, her face painted with false calm. But when her eyes fell on Amina alive, standing beside her father, her mouth dropped open. The pot slipped from her hands, crashing to the ground. "You," she stammered, her voice shaking. This cannot be." Pa Musa turned to her, his face hard. "Zuba, is it true?" Before she could answer, Amina cried out, her voice ringing through the compound. "She cursed me, Papa! I saw her at the stream with the others. They made a circle by the fire. I heard her say, 'Your spirit would be theirs in 3 nights.'" Mama Zuba's hands trembled, but she forced a laugh. "Lies, all lies. This girl has hated me since I entered this house. She makes up stories because she cannot stand me." But before her words could settle, a new voice rose from the crowd. "You lie, woman." All turned. Mariam and her father had just arrived, their faces pale with anger. The fisherman pointed a shaking hand at Zuba. "Yesterday, you sold me a rabbit for 7 cowries. You called it fat and healthy. But it was no rabbit, it was this girl." My own daughter opened the cage, and the creature ran until it reached Baba Karim's house. There, the truth was revealed. The crowd roared. "Ah, witchcraft, wickedness." Mama Zuba's face went white as chalk. She shook her head wildly. "No, no, they plot against me. This is not true. Do not believe them." But the neighbors pressed closer, murmuring, their eyes flashing with fury. Some pointed at her. Others whispered curses under their breath. Word spread quickly. By evening, the matter had reached the palace. The great Iroko tree cast its wide shadow over the village square. Men, women, and children gathered, their voices hushed with curiosity and fear. At the center sat the king on his carved wooden throne, his crown glinting in the sun, the staff of power across his lap. Around him stood the elders, their grey heads bowed in silence. Warriors, spears in hand, guarded the circle. The king's voice rang out. Bring them forward, Amina, Pa Musa, Madam Zuba, and the women who joined her in the night. The warriors dragged Mama Zuba and her 7 friends to the center. Their eyes darted like trapped animals, their wrappers dusty from the struggle. Then the king turned to Amina. His gaze softened. Child, speak. Tell us why the spirits brought this matter before my throne. A hush fell. Amina stepped forward, barefoot, her wrapper torn, but her voice steady. She bowed low, then lifted her head. My king, ever since my mother died, I have lived in sorrow. My father married Madam Zuba, and from that day, my life became one of suffering. While her children ate meat and hot soup, I was given scraps. I fetched water, pounded yam, washed, and swept until my body ached. If I made the smallest mistake, she beat me. Still, I never complained because I did not want my father to worry. The crowd murmured, eyes turning towards Zuba with disgust. Pa Musa buried his face in his hands, his body trembling. Tears slipped through his fingers as he groaned. Oh, my daughter, and I never knew. Every morning I left for the farm. Every night I returned late and tired. I thought you were safe, fed, and cared for with the food I brought home. I never saw your pain. The king raised his staff for silence, then motioned for Amina to continue. 3 nights ago, Amina said, her voice trembling now, I saw them, my stepmother and her friends. 8 women gathered at the stream. They poured something into the water and chanted in a tongue I did not know. I heard them say, it was time to take a strong spirit. They had planned to take their husband's spirits alongside that of my father. They said in 3 nights their lives would belong to them. When they saw me watching, they chased me and cursed me. I awoke as a rabbit. She carried me to the market to be sold as mead. If not for Mariam and her father, who chased me and led me to Baba Karim, I would be dead. Baba Karim broke the curse, and I stand here today to speak the truth. The crowd erupted. Gasps, wails, and cries of abomination filled the air. Women clutched their children tightly. Men spat on the ground. The king's sharp eyes turned to Mama Zuba and her companions. You have heard these words. What do you say? One of the women stepped forward, her lips trembling. My king, they are lies. The girl hates her stepmother, so she invents stories. We are innocent. The others chorused in agreement, nodding and swearing by the gods. Mama Zuba lifted her chin. Yes, my king, this girl despises me. She tells false tales to drive me from my home. The king sat back slowly, his face unreadable. Then he raised his staff and struck it against the earth with a thundering sound. Bring forth the staff of truth, he commanded. 2 warriors carried it forward, a long, ancient staff, carved with sacred markings and wrapped in white cloth. They set it before the king, and the crowd held its breath. The king's voice thundered. Let the staff judge today. If you are innocent, it will leave you standing. But if you are guilty, your own mouth will betray you. The square grew so still that even the wind seemed to stop moving. The warriors set the ancient staff before the king. Its wood was dark with age, its surface etched with sacred symbols that glowed faintly under the sun. Wrapped around it was a strip of white cloth. untouched by dust or stain. The crowd leaned forward in silence. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. The king's voice boomed. Let them step forward, one by one. Let the staff of truth judge their words. The first of the women was pushed forward, trembling. She lifted the staff with shaking hands and pressed it to her lips. For a moment, she stood tall. Then her body stiffened. Her lips quivered, and before she could stop herself, the words poured out. It is true. We gathered by the stream that night. We called on spirits for power. We needed a strong life to give, so we chose our husbands. The crowd roared in outrage. Abomination! Wickedness! The woman fell to her knees, weeping as the warriors dragged her back. Her husband, shocked by her confession, whispered, "She had always treated me with so much care and love." One after the other, each woman stepped forward. Each time, as soon as the staff touched their lips, the lies on their tongues burned away, replaced by trembling confessions. One by one, they admitted the truth that they had stood in the circle, chanted by the stream, and chosen their husbands' spirits as their sacrifice. Finally, Mama Zuba was pushed forward. She tried to resist, but the warriors forced her to her knees. Sweat poured down her face. "Hold it to her lips," the king commanded. The staff brushed her mouth. Instantly, her body shook violently. She cried out, struggling, but the words burst from her throat like fire. "Yes, it is true," she screamed. "I hated that child. She saw what she should not have seen. I turned her into a rabbit to silence her. I planned to give my husband to the spirits in 3 nights. They promised me wealth and power. I did it. I am guilty." Gasps and cries of horror filled the square. Some villagers covered their ears. Others spat in disgust. Mothers pulled their children closer. Men muttered prayers under their breath. Pa Musa fell to his knees, tears running down his face. He beat his chest with both hands. "And I lived with this woman under my roof. I trusted her. I shared my food with her, and all the while she plotted to end my life and torment my daughter." Mama Zuba collapsed to the ground, sobbing and begging, "Forgive me, forgive me." But the crowd's fury only grew louder. The king stood tall, his staff of power raised high. His voice thundered above the noise. "You have confessed with your own lips. You and your companions are guilty of witchcraft, betrayal, and bloodlust. From this day forth, you are banished from this land. Should you ever return, your lives will be forfeit." The warriors seized Mama Zuba and her companions. They screamed and fought, but the people only jeered and spat as they were dragged toward the forest path. Their husbands still too shocked and sad to move. The square trembled with voices, but the king lifted his staff again for silence. His gaze fell on Amina, standing barefoot and trembling beside her weeping father. "Child," the king said, his voice softening, "you have suffered, but you spoke the truth. Because of your courage, evil has been exposed. You have saved your father and your people." The crowd erupted in cheers, lifting Amina onto their shoulders, calling her the girl who returned. Pamusa held her tightly, tears of both sorrow and joy streaming down his face. And so, under the great Iroko tree, the truth shone brighter than lies, and the wicked were cast out forever. By the time the sun dipped low, the women had been abandoned at the mouth of the dreaded forest, the forest where hunters rarely returned, the forest whispered to belong to spirits older than time. At first, they huddled together, trembling, whispering among themselves. "They cannot do this to us," one said. "The spirits will protect us," another insisted. But Mama Zuba's face was pale. She knew the truth, for the spirits they had bargained with were not gentle. They were demanding, cruel, and hungry. A prize had been promised their husband's spirits, and it had not been delivered. Night fell heavy. The third night since their failed ritual. The air grew thick. The trees groaned, and strange winds howled through the branches. Shadows moved where no one walked. The women clung to each other, their chants broken and useless now. Then it began. One by one, they screamed, clutching their heads as unseen hands clawed at their minds. Their eyes rolled, their words turned to gibberish. They tore their wrappers, stumbled barefoot through thorns, laughing and crying at once. Their hair grew wild, their bodies covered in scratches, their voices shrieking through the forest. Mama Zuba's scream was the loudest. "Spirits, forgive me," she cried. But the spirits were merciless. They had waited for sacrifice. They had been cheated. Now they claimed their debt another way. By dawn, the villagers who lived nearest to the forest swore they heard the mad wails of 8 women echoing through the trees. Some said they saw them running in circles, eyes burning red, chasing shadows that were not there. Others claimed they had become nothing more than wandering shells, bound forever to the evil forest. And so it was said, the 8 women who sought power lost their minds instead. Because they failed to give what they promised, the spirits took their sanity as payment. Never again did they return to the village.